Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for another Loeb Leadership Real Talk. I'm going to share the bios of our speakers today, just so you have a chance to see who's going to be addressing you. Unfortunately, David Robert had an unexpected urgent situation and won't be able to join us. But I am so proud and honored to be joined by Joy Stevens and Dr. Fritz Gillette for this timely and impactful topic. For those of you joining us for the first time, Loeb Leadership is a certified woman-owned business that's a management and leadership consultant company that focuses on executive coaching, training and development, and organizational coaching. Organizational consulting. So to start things off, our title today is Building an Inclusive Culture in a Divisive World. And I think if you just think about your experiences over the past week, I'll speak for myself. I've felt a lot of divisiveness in the world, in my community, in my social circles, and from what we're hearing from clients in the workplace. I do want to emphasize that this is not the first time in American history that we are in a state like this. If you look just in the past 100 years, starting, let's say, with the 1950s and the Joe McCarthy era of fighting communism and neighbor turning on neighbor and blacklists and things like that, the Vietnam War, civil rights, the experience with Watergate, with the gas crisis in the 70s, with political violence. We've been through this before. I think what makes it different for the time we're in today is social media and streaming platforms kind of put rocket fuel on this and how it impacts everybody. And before we get into the panel with Joy and Fritz, I also want this to be interactive and engaging, and we encourage the audience to message the panelists questions throughout the session, and we'll respond. So to start it off, and I'm just going to throw this out there, Joy, Fritz, see who wants to take it first. If you're a leader of a company or an organization, if you're a manager or an individual contributor, you're in a law firm, a professional service firm, how do we create an environment where there may be people with opposing, dissenting voices? Some may find other views offensive, others may find those people's views offensive. How do we create that inclusive, collaborative workplace without appearing to shutting down dissenting voices?
It's a really good question. And I think you have to take a step back and realize that this too is not anything new. It is a change in paradigm shift, and we've had it before. Fun fact, once upon a time, as we were trying to make people safe in the United States and seatbelt laws were being implemented, there were protests and outcries that wearing a seatbelt was un-American and you were taking away freedoms, and there was an overreach by the government for this reason. And now we look at ourselves today. The ding, ding, ding when I get in my car is just, oh yeah, let me get that. And I forget all about it. And it never occurs to me to be angry about the fact that someone else was trying to make sure that I didn't go through my windshield, right? Speed limits, safety harnesses. We don't think twice about the fact that there are sexual harassment laws, right? Once upon a time, that was seen as too much of a burden. And so the reason I start there is to say that right now, what we're experiencing is more smaller communities with voices that haven't always been heard are now reaching a critical mass where their voices too are asking to be considered and be heard. And it's the same process. We've done it before. It's just that now other people who haven't previously had to be on the side of you need to make space are now being asked to make space, and they've not had to do that before. So if you are a leader in an organization, it's the same change management process you've done before. When you implemented SAP, when you implemented Oracle, or what else? Salesforce, whatever you did, and people grumbled about it and said it was too hard and they didn't want to do it, and you had some outliers that said they were never gonna, okay, but here's where we're headed, and here's what we're doing, and we think this is the right thing, and you move on. And some people are going to self-select because they don't want to do it. Okay, that's fine. But this is what we believe to be the best thing for our organization, and we move forward. It's change management under different auspices. And if you have people that have differing opinions, everyone, including the people that have opinions different from yours, or that we may broadly say might, in retrospect, not hold up well in history books later on. Even if they have opinions that are unpopular, they still have a right to it. They have a right to say it, and they also have a right to defend it. And I'm sure we'll get into that later. But if you're a leader in a company, it's a change management process. And I think if you can take some of the emotional and triggering words out of it and realize it is a paradigm shift, and we've done that before, it gives you a framework that you can work from.
Thank you, Joy. And Fritz, I'd like you to respond, but I also would like to add a wrinkle. You're my resident clinical psychologist, so I always call you, and I have clients who are struggling emotionally. The things I hear from clients who are experiencing this, and not everybody is, but some people are, is fatigue, exhaustion, depression. Um, they don't want to go. There are people in the workplace who take an opposing side or have to let you know what they believe, even though you really don't want to. You're just there to do your job. What do you tell that manager or leader? To where do they start to at least address creating more mutual understanding in this polarized place?
Oh, let's go through that step by step, because as the resident clinical psychologist, I'm often asking people to, for a moment, just breathe and notice what's happening with them, and notice where their energies are being focused, because many of our leaders are quite often awake at night and are fatigued because they're constantly worried about these things and focusing on these things. And if at the beginning of it all, if your motivation was just to try and do what you thought was right, your motivations are going to wane. So I'm often asking leaders to first check in with themselves and do the self work around what their end goal was and continues to be. And when they can get connected to that, they may then be able to continue moving the ball up the field, as we say. And this work isn't easy. No one ever said it was going to be easy. And this work isn't short term. If anybody thought it was going to be short term, sorry. Doing this kind of work, this cultural change work, is ongoing. And we need to remain motivated and strengthened by the collaboration of each other. The colleagues on this webinar are people I talk to all the time when my energy dips a little bit low. And we find ways to encourage each other to keep on going. And so I encourage leaders to develop a community amongst themselves and seek out people who are experts in these areas to help advise on how to keep on going. It isn't easy. And so fatigue was not something that surprised me, as it's been really manifesting itself in the last couple of years. But I got to tell you, back in 2020, when the phone was ringing off the hook and people were asking for assistance in many of these areas, I would ask people, why weren't you calling me the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that? And quite often you could hear a pin drop, but I was challenging them in that moment to examine the motivations, because I knew then, and we now know now, that this work is ongoing, and we need to have opportunities like this to talk about it and hash it up and discuss.
So go ahead, Joy.
I want to piggyback off of something you just said, Fritz. Why weren't you calling me before that? The broad analogy I want to use here, or metaphor, is going to the doctor because you already feel pain, right? Doc, my heart is beating weird. Doc, my blood pressure's through the roof. My A1C is at 7. You already sick. Where were you when I was telling you to exercise, when I was telling you to drink water, when I was telling you to watch your sugar, et cetera, watch your fat intake, all these things that were preventative, that were proactive. And now that your health is in the dungeon, you're like, oh my God, what happened? Help me. And I think one of the things, even before 2020, I was seeing an increase in interest in diversity from a gender standpoint, because before we had the very public death of George Floyd, we had the Me Too movement about 4 or 5 years before that, right? And so people were asking, what can we do for women? Because I'm sick. It's gotten so bad that it's unavoidable now. And then we had something happen again in 2020. It's gotten so bad, it is something I can no longer actively ignore, like my blood pressure or the mini stroke I just had on the job, et cetera. And so, where were you when you could have done something to prevent it? I was busy pretending it didn't exist. And
Well,
I know that sounds very harsh, but that's
right. And
the
I think that's where I see the struggle, like as Fritz described, letting managers, leaders self-assess how to get to a calmer state, how to manage their stress. Fritz, you always talk about the amygdala gland and the cortisol that gets you alert and amped up and in survival mode. Um, but where does it go from there? Does it go to an organizational level? I mean, as an example, just last week in the Philadelphia Inquirer, the University of Pennsylvania issued a statement saying it will no longer respond publicly to world events unless they directly affect the university. Now, higher ed went through a real rough year this past year, for a variety of reasons, but global political, social issues definitely played a big part. Should companies be doing that? Should companies just be saying, you know what, we're not taking a stand? I mean, you see, in light of this recent Supreme Court decisions uh, affecting affirmative action and diversity, equity, inclusion, some organizations in education and the private sector are saying, we're out of this game. We're not doing it anymore. Um, does something like that contribute to making a more inclusive culture in a divisive world?
As someone who pays attention at the individual level, the group level, the family level, the organizational level, the motivations of human beings, we always got to go back there. So if you talk about making public statements, we've just gone through a period of years where a lot of organizations were doing things because it was performative. Nobody wants to admit it, but they were doing it because it was trending. It was doing it because it was in vogue. And so I'm always asking people to come back and check their motivations. And when we start to check motivations, if you're a CEO of an organization, your motivations are often around shareholders, around profit margins, around what your company's supposed to be doing. And so if it's not trending in the world to be doing these things, you're going to see organizations start to recede from doing it, unless the motivations included some real lived experience. So in Joy's examples, she's talking about why we really rush into the doctor, because we feel in pain. It's in our bodies. And this work, in order for it to continue, is that we've got to do the work that connects us to the real pain that we feel as a result of it, not this intellectual stuff that we sometimes, oh, that's so terrible that's happening over there. We've got to connect to how these things are impacting us. And often when we can't, and we can often predict this, when we can't make that connection, we're going to suddenly get tired. We're going to eventually get tired because it's hard to stay motivated in a cause that you're not living in some kind of way.
Joy, do you want to address
um,
that?
And as Fritz was talking, he talked about the individual and then the group and then the company. Um, I am a DEI subject matter expert, right? And there have been many things that have happened in the public eye that on my private and public social media, I have not commented on either. And it's not because I didn't have a feeling about it. It's because I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if the information I had was factual. I wasn't sure if it was the whole picture. I wasn't sure if the stance I was taking had enough historical context. Is this the right thing? In the moment, I didn't want to say something and then find out 20 minutes later, an hour later, 2 days later, oh, there's more to the story, and then have to retract and take it down. What damage had I done? I have friends, contacts, associates, network on multiple sides of multiple issues. Who am I going to negatively affect if I accidentally say the wrong thing? And it becomes analysis paralysis. And so in that moment, it's the option of, if I say something, what is the probability that I am going to get it wrong versus what is the possibility that am I even the person that somebody cares if I say something and get it right? Does anybody need my opinion on this? And is anybody looking for my opinion on this? And if the answer is, girl, no, not really. You can have a seat. Then I'm going to have a seat because sometimes I don't need to know. Do I need to know Kraft Macaroni and Cheese opinion on Ukraine? No, I don't, because that's not their forte. Now, if they are actively, to Fritz's point about it, does it affect me? If they are actively investing in things that are supporting genocide in some part of the country or some part of the world, yeah, I need them to do something about that. And it doesn't need to be public. Divestiture doesn't have to be a public performative thing. Just stop funding it. You don't have to make a public statement. And if you know that your company is getting money or profiting off the death of anyone, you need to analyze where you're getting your money from. And from a personal standpoint, I've talked to my personal portfolio broker, and he has told me there's this particular account, it's moving up, blah, 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 blah. A little bit down the line, something, pipeline, native land. Nah, bro, we're not doing that. I don't care. I don't care what it is. You just said that they treated with something native land. I don't want to make my money that way. So I don't have to go online and say, I chose today not to do that. I just know that I don't want to do that. And so when we talk about making statements, you can choose how you profit, and you can choose how you want to make your money, because all money isn't good money. But you don't necessarily have to make a statement about everything, especially if you don't know enough about the situation to be well informed. And if your personal opinion or the opinion of your company doesn't necessarily advance the conversation, you can sit down. You can have, as they say, you can have several seats, right? That's
Yeah,
just my 2 cents.
I was just
No,
thinking about
thank you, Joy.
I was thinking about there were some examples of where I was working with C-level, C-suite people, and they were thinking about making a public statement, and they put more energy into the public statement than they did to the internal statement to their employees. So if we come back to the leaders who may be watching this, who are really wondering where to put the energy, again, back to motivations, what are you trying to do in doing this? And in some instances, they really wanted to respond to employee sentiment or something that they felt within the organization that they wanted to make sure they're representing to the world and to their employees. I caution people to pay attention then to the employees and to increase dialogue. I often do seminars and workshops on the difference between discussion, debate, and dialogue. And most of us have had some experience in training in discussion and even in debate, but quite often we as leaders do not have a lot of experience in sitting down with people and engaging them in dialogue, shared peer-to-peer dialogue, where the goal really is to really deeply understand where we're all coming from. And that is a skill, and maybe for some it's even an art to do that. But when that practice is done on a regular basis, and it has to be done on a regular basis because the day one that you do it, it's not a safe space to do it. No matter who said so, even if I said so, it's not safe. But when you have a company culture where there are places that have been well used, where people can come and sit and engage in real dialogue, you start to generate a culture where there is safety. And then later on, when you're asking for people's real input and advice and inclusivity in the decision making, you're going to get some real truthful answers. But if you don't have a safe system that you've created through that cultural iterative process, then you don't. So I can
So
keep it
Fritz,
together.
if we could build on that, because I think, you know, I think that's kind of the path that you and Joy are talking about, that people are looking for. And I look, we all know that that's hard work. Sitting down, engaging in dialogue requires time, requires patience, requires active listening, and depending on the size of your organization and your leadership team, it requires exertion. But you know, and the leaders could have all that good intent, but if the stakeholders are engaging in conversations around politics and race and Supreme Court and um, gender, do you create kind of the boundaries or the lanes to have these conversations, or like how Joy alluded to, they shouldn't, maybe we're not going to have these conversations in the workplace. I don't know what the impact of that would be. Joy, go ahead.
I did not say we're not going to have these conversations in the workplace.
I
I
no no
said
no
public
companies
statements.
not make public statements, but
Right.
just building on that, what do we do about politics, religion, all these you know controversial topics in the workplace? What do we do about when that happens?
There's a lot that needs to happen before you can even start to have that conversation. And the first part is to get people to understand who they are, because a lot of people have replaced their sense of self with an external identity. I am this thing, and I'm no longer, a human who loves their dog and their sister and their parents. I'm a Democrat, right? Or I'm a liberal, or I'm a conservative, or I'm a Trumper, or I'm this thing. And that thing is a monolith. And I'm no longer an individual. And so when we start defining ourselves as part of a gang, whatever that gang may be, we lose a sense of ourselves and we get tied up in the identity of that gang. And so if we can start get people to get back to who are you as a human being, as an individual, that is a lot of self-reflection. And it can also help people decouple themselves from whatever political, socio-political, economic, structural identity they might also be related to, and just to say, I'm a human being, and these are the things that I care about. These are my values. These are my drivers, away from the polarized and political spectrum. If they can get that grounding, that one anchor, then you can have a more intelligent and meaningful conversation, because then you can say, well, this is who I am. Yeah, I agree with this thing from that gang. I agree with this thing from that gang. And I agree with this thing from this outlying gang over here, but I'm still me. And then the me here can have a conversation with the you over there. And we can recognize, just because I like these things doesn't mean that I can't also recognize the humanity in you. But if
Oh,
I'm only, go ahead, Fritz.
that is so, what you're talking about is so rich because as someone who hears people from every angle of any spectrum, the goal is not to be out there in the spectrum outside the room, but to be with the person that is expressing themselves. And so if they tell me they're voting for a political candidate, you can best believe we're not going to talk much politics content-wise with me. I'm going to talk to them about what's important to you. How did you come to feel the way you do about these issues? And I might get curious from a place of caring and humanity and empathy about the person that I'm sitting with. And the more I do that, the less we're going to talk about the political decisions and the voting decisions that we make. But quite often what happens is, as soon as you announce you're voting for somebody, it's like it's gonna be this conversation about something else that is not in the room. We are all humans that breathe with beating hearts, who were born into this world, and there's so many things that we have in common. We all have a narrative, we all have a story, we all have a background. And if we are taking the time, not a whole lot of time every day, but cumulatively to get to know each other, it'll all start to make sense. We won't necessarily need to talk about all that other stuff because we're getting into real connection with one another. That is what is dissipated. In this world of connectivity, the amount of real human interconnectivity often has been dissipated by the information overload that's hitting us all the time. So
Mhm.
that's why I had to
and
jump in.
and
Go ahead.
and the stress and responsibility of doing your job,
Yeah.
on top of all this, and your family responsibilities, or personal responsibilities. So building on all that, we have um, national and local elections in less than 2 months, and by most accounts, very divided country, communities, things like that. If you're coaching a leader or manager of the leading up to and the after, what kinds of things would you be raising with them?
I'd be inviting them within their peers to create regular and recurrent opportunities for people to really, as Joy was talking about before, connect to one another.
Mhm. I'd be,
And
go ahead.
yeah,
And
and
what kinds of activities, Fritz, could they do? Like, if you can give one or two examples so people can actually model
it,
it.
it could be the old simple with let's go out to lunch and let's be with one another and let's talk about what's coming up and what's happening. It could be within the organization in conference rooms. We can on a regular basis just have conversations that's talking about what's coming up for people and what's important with certain ground rules. The reason I went around teaching people about the difference between dialogue, discussion, and debate is because in discussion, we take what's being talked about, we slice and dice it so we can come up with one thing. In debate, we are fighting for somebody to win and win their point. But in a dialogue interaction, I'm responding to you with, so if I understand you correctly, you're saying such and such. You're saying that you're voting for this particular person. Let me really understand the you behind that. And so this is often, we were often as leaders and in general, we're afraid to do this because we didn't have a lot of training in this.
Mhm.
Most of us did not go to school to study dialogue, but we might have studied how to do discussion. A lot of our classes made us do discussions. And if we were on a debate team, we were taught how to debate and fight and fight and fight. But we're not in a culture that I see that we've had any formal training, any didactic guardrails taught about how you do dialogue. And dialogue might be the hardest one because in dialogue, I have to sit with what you just said, listen to it. I don't have to agree with it. And I have to, before I give you my point, I have to be able to reflect it back to you
Mhm.
and say, oh, okay, I understand. And I've had so many conversations with people whose political affiliations and whatever I categorically would disagree with, and we were having a debate or discussion. And then they say something, and I'm like, well, that makes a whole lot of sense. Can you tell me more about that? And usually it's in those spontaneous interactions with people that those things come out and we're able to do something with it. We may not walk out of that room agreeing intellectually about the same political stuff, but we might actually be closer as a result of it.
I'm gonna take us on a little journey real quick. Um, I'm going to add another D to the things you just mentioned. You got dialogue, discussion, debate. I also see more and more that we devolve into the dozens as well. If you're familiar with the playground antics of trying to one up one another so that everybody goes, oh, and you win, so to speak, and there's a little sound bite. I'm seeing this more and more on the news where everybody wants to have something that people walk where you can kind of like and walk away from things with, it's the political equivalent of saying your mama, like I see that more and more in discussions, or what passes for a discussion, where everybody wants to appear on the surface to be strong. And at first I thought that maybe this was a new development, but then I remembered that Aaron Burr shot Alexander Hamilton, and we've been doing this for a long time, where we lose the ability to get our point across with words, and we result to name calling and violence, et cetera, et cetera. It's as old as the country itself. But also the fact that we see strength only in overbearing domination. You turn on any channel, regardless of the political leaning. It doesn't matter if it's Fox News or MSNBC or whatever, there's this tendency to want to overtalk the other person, not to hear them out or to even have a healthy debate, but to shut them down and shut them up so that they seem weak or small and you seem chest pumpingly big. And never mind that they may have had a point. And if they try to engage in a dialogue with you and give you a chance to speak, the very act of them giving you a chance to speak is seen as weakness, because how come they didn't come back to you? We've encouraged this culture of you've got to overtalk somebody to be strong. You've got to overtalk somebody to be seen as the winner. And a healthy dialogue is out the window. You can't have a healthy dialogue if the action of speaking over someone is what's been reinforced. And so leaders, if you've already achieved the power, you are the C whatever, CHRO, C-suite, you've got all the power in the firm, the company, the academia, whatever. You now are in a position to change what power looks like. You have the chance to be the one to say, no, let's hear this person out. Finish your statement. I'm listening. You have a good point. I don't think I agree with it, but I don't agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it, right? You know what? I concede that point to you. I think I'm right on this, but I can see your point on that. That is healthy discourse, right? But we don't do that anymore. We want to unequivocally beat somebody down verbally. And if we can't do it with a rational argument, we'll just start saying whatever in order to get that dozens moment. Oh, you won, and walk out. Mic drop. All of those things and all of these phrases that we hear don't promote conversation or listening. It promotes bullying, verbal bullying over and over again. And we've turned bullying on a grand scale into, I just want to have a conversation. No, you don't. You want to beat me up so you can look good to your friends, whatever the situation may be. And if you already have power, you have the power to change that dynamic by setting a different example. That's what leaders can do in organizations, is show compassion, show empathy, show that you can be strong and still listen to somebody else. That is a game-changing difference.
Thank you, Joy. And again, as we're just passing the halfway point, we highly encourage the audience to submit questions or reactions to what you've heard. You could go into the chat, send it to the host and panelists. So with all this discussion of dialogue and understanding, and look, I know it works. It sounds great. I know it's hard work. But how can leaders and managers balance that need for dialogue with the risk of exacerbating the division, or making people kind of go further apart if it's not facilitated effectively, or it gets elevated and heated?
One of the stepwise things I encourage leaders to do is first to identify amongst themselves people with whom they can talk to about this. Again, a lot of what stops us from doing this stuff is fear. We either fear of getting it wrong, fear of upsetting up somebody. But there are also a lot of instances where we have this fear. Most people are conflict averse. Most people don't want to make things worse. Most people have actually experienced some level of, oh, shoot, I said too much. But those don't become reasons that we stop trying. We have to continue to do the work. Earlier, I said, well, I could probably say being a leader is hard. And part of why you get paid the big bucks when you are a leader, especially in a C-suite, organization, is because you have to not only be aware of what your organization's deliverables are and what your company is supposed to be doing, but you're also managing the most valuable asset that you can imagine is your people. And your people have multiple levels of lived experiences. So I'm often, when I go into organizations, I do start with the leaders. And sometimes it's a one-on-one work of handling these questions. David, the questions you're bringing up are the questions I do get. And it's often like, how do I go in there and fix it? And I go, let's start with you, if we can do that. And then let's start to work within the resources around you, because we've talked a little bit before about power. Often the one leader can't do it alone. They need to build a coalition. They need to build a consensus. They need to build connection amongst others. And then as you get practice at doing that and doing that over and over again, iterative process, you start to get more comfortable with going into those areas. Now, we've used the word before of a divisive. It's a divisive time. Nothing new about these things, but for many of us, it's new to have to go out there in the middle of this internet leading world, social media world, and say things because it's so easy to get it wrong. Yet we need to continue to work with each other to do it. You can't do it alone. This is why we need allies and we need colleagues and we need to talk to each other. And I started before with saying we got to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, why am I doing this? And make sure that the reasons why I'm doing it align with what I'm actually doing. Think about that and then feel about that. Again, I'm the psychologist, and that's what I'm often asking people to do. And I know a lot of you with your frontal cortex is like, but he's not telling me exactly what to do. I said, doesn't work like that. Working with people is a process. Sorry.
Yeah, no. And I think understanding that process can be very difficult because, like Joy said, we're not monoliths. You know, everybody has their own lived experience and what they bring to their position and their role and how they interact with people.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time and effort and care. You know, you got to want to do it effectively and not come across as performative, because I think that's where managers and leaders make mistakes, where it's performative, it's obvious to everybody in the organization, and that's probably going to contribute to making things worse rather than better.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad Fritz went first on that because my knee-jerk reaction was when you said, how do you handle this? How do you do this without it being painful? It's going to be painful. You ever had to pop a pimple or lance a boil or
Ouch, Joy.
so hey, this is what I'm talking about. Think about something most people have dealt with at some point: ingrown hair, somewhere on your chin or your eyebrow, whatever, wherever it might be. You don't notice it until it's too late, and now you got a problem. It's swollen, et cetera, et cetera. And you've got to get it out, because if you don't, it's going to just going to get worse. And so old school methods, you might get a needle and alcohol and do it. New school, you might go to the doctor and have them do whatever they do. But the problem is it is going to hurt. And until you deal with the pain is only going to get worse. It's not going to miraculously just go away. And if you don't deal with it, you're going to wake up in the middle of the night with because it's going to pop on its own. That's not what you want. You do not want it to handle itself, because that is a very violent eruption, right? And I'm not trying to say things are going to get technically violent in your workplace. What I'm saying is all of a sudden your productivity is down. Your teams are no longer working with each other. There is all this factioning and cliques in the workforce. These people don't talk to those people. This girl can't stand that guy, blah, blah, blah. And nobody is talking to nobody. And it happened overnight. You don't know what really went wrong, but you thought things would just get better if you gave it enough time. Time does not heal all wounds. That is a lie. Time heals injuries that have been treated. If you don't treat the injury, if you don't treat the wound, it just festers and it gets worse. So this idea of how can I fix this? How can I make it better without going through the painful process of treatment? You can't. Get that out of your mind, that you're going to be able to miraculously fairy dust all of this and everybody's going to be like, oh, everything's fine. It's not. You're going to have some hard conversations. That's why I said earlier, you're going to have to start with getting people grounded in who they are as human beings. If they don't have that, then trying to have any sort of higher level conversation about the concepts that they need to understand and potentially, maybe surgically excise some things from their understanding and accept other things. They can't do that because they'll hear you say, let go of who you are when you say, let go of this idea. That has to happen first, internal self-reflection. Then be ready to have conversations where all we're talking about today is anybody who wants to come into this room and have a discussion about this particular topic. We're ready to talk about this particular small topic, and then stay on topic. Perhaps have some experts in the room that are well-versed in that one topic, and then talk it out. There's going to be maybe some pain and tears and a little bit of anger. Okay, we understand that we knew this was volatile coming in here. We understand that after we leave out of here, people will have said their piece and you will have been heard. And we hope that you will have learned something, maybe see things a different way. But when we walk out of here, the respect that you have for your coworkers stands. It is not allowable to leave out of here deciding that you will disrespect anyone that works here because that is against the values of the company. We gave you a chance to hear and be heard, to understand and be understood. That's what this moment was about, or whatever you might want to talk about. That is an extremely brave thing to do, is an extremely forward-thinking thing to do, and it is something that puts you on the cutting edge of inclusion work because you're including everybody and not just certain subsets. If you're hearing everyone, then nobody can say they didn't want to listen. And you can potentially reduce the opportunity for further disgruntledness and misperceptions down the line if you give people a chance. If they don't want to take that chance, that's on them. If they don't want to listen to other people, they're self-selecting to be, they're unincluding themselves. You're opening the door for everyone to have a conversation. You're opening the door for, could get a little, little dicey in there, but the understanding is we came to talk about this. In the sorority that I belong to, we call it a lemon squeeze. We squeeze all this bitterness out. Get it out right now. We're going to talk about this topic that we know has been bubbling under the surface. Once we get it out, okay, have you said your piece? Do you understand? Can we move forward now? Can we still respect each other? If we cannot respect each other, then we got more talking to do. Sometimes that might take a retreat, I'm just saying. But the idea that we can just wait and it'll get better, I think that is naive. I don't think that we can just hope it goes away. Hope has never been a strategy for any business. So I'm just putting that out there. There is
Thank
no
you.
easy way. Yeah.
Thank you, Joy. Fritz?
I'm thinking at this juncture, it might be good for us to actually talk about the frameworks that one can employ, leaders can employ, we can employ when we do this work. Because often we are called into organizations in crisis. And what's some of the first things that we do? But we spend time in discovery, really trying to understand from the people that have called us, what's the problem? The doctor in me is also saying, how long have you had this problem? And we look at the etiology. Your example before, Joy, of a wound got me thinking, yeah, we could treat the wound, but often we also got to get to the etiology of the wound because we can treat the wound, but it comes back.
Mm-hmm.
And 20 years ago, when I really started doing this work, a lot of the approaches was treat the room, checkbox approach. Fritz come into a seminar workshop, it's all fixed. But now we have learned, and I'm glad that many organizations have learned, that you've got to get into the people, practices, and policies and the history of the organization to really understand what the presenting issue is about. It's not just a wound today, it's something that was festering for a while. So first part of that framework is coming in and really understanding what has happened, what has transpired. And then in the spirit of inclusivity, we often then work to try and include stakeholders from the organization that hopefully represent different tiers and hopefully represent different ethnic and racial backgrounds so that we get input from all kinds of places. Because if the sponsor, the person that brings you in, the CEO, wants to be effective and get good return on investment on the work, then they really need to engage in this systematic and systemic process. And if they want to actually show that they're people, that they're doing something about it, and articulate a clear vision as to how we're going to go about this, having an analytic and an inclusive approach, an investigatory approach to this, is a way to really demonstrate an effort at long-term change. And I keep saying it's a cyclical process. We're going to always be asking ourselves our motivation. Why are we doing this? What does this look like now? Why are we doing it now? What does this look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? How do we build it into the organization and cultural structure going forward? Um, because I was just thinking for a moment, because our leaders are sometimes saying, well, what's the first thing to do? Well, a lot of times you as leaders, you're often like seeing a problem, you're having the boil, and you're just trying to treat it with some kind of workshop or seminar. And we usually come in and we're like, okay, we can do that, but that's not going to get as much return on investment as if we actually looked at all the other stuff. And then as we're preparing some kind of effort to really help, um, it makes sense, especially in the spirit of having something that's going to work for the whole organization, to include as many people in the planning process as we can.
And it's much, listening to both of you, it's much more of a longer game
Right.
than quick fix. And so in that spirit, I'm going to share what I've heard some organizations are doing and get your reaction. Using the election as an example, I know there are some organizations that have asked people, if your candidate wins, do not gloat in the office. Like, do not, just let's keep it low key. Do not pound your chest or pump your fist. We don't want to antagonize each other. Like, let's just come to work like it's a normal day.
Mhm.
Reactions to that?
I agree with that. I wholeheartedly agree with that because that is empathy. It doesn't matter which candidate you're voting for. This is a very emotional moment. And if the person that you voted for doesn't win, it is going to be emotionally, potentially emotionally devastating to you. And you still got to come to work on November 6th. And to hear other people celebrating could be heartbreaking for you. And so, regardless, well, with whoever may win the election, I think that it is appropriate to say, let's be considerate of other people who may not be in a festive mood, and let's just keep that, to a minimum at best. I think that's fair.
Chris?
I would agree. Empathy is an important thing to be aware of. And as we grow in our awareness that we're not all experiencing this world the same, it means is as we get that information, as we come into the places and spaces where we live, empathy is a way of showing care and respect. Now, your candidate wins and you're very happy. No one's telling you not to be in a good mood. No one's telling you not to feel happy or that it's wrong to feel happy, regardless of whoever wins. But empathy is not about that. It's just about being aware that others may be impacted differently. And that is for sure the thing that the longer you are in this world, you're going to realize that we're not all experiencing this moment the same. And that awareness, especially as leaders, can help us direct the course of traffic and direct things in such a way that helps our people out as much as we possibly can. To do so really speaks to insensitivity and uncaringness.
Would you do anything further than that? Like, in light of the fact that some people are going to potentially have an emotional reaction or extreme disappointment or anger, frustration. Would we just leave it at don't gloat, or would you create an environment where, hey, let's talk about this?
I personally probably wouldn't use the word gloat. I would try to inspire people toward empathy and toward
Okay.
awareness of others. Don't is I'm telling you not to do something. I don't want to be that people that does that. But as we raise our awareness of how we're all can all be different and be experiencing things differently, we can still feel what we feel, but walk through the world not making things worse with what we do with
Right.
our behavior.
Right. And remind people that if, because it's very likely that it's going to be a very close election. And if not for a few things going differently, how would you feel if you came in the office and people were celebrating and things had gone differently? And knowing how you would have felt, can't you see how you should maybe not overly celebrate because other people might be feeling that right now? I mean, that's what empathy is. How would you feel if it happened to you? So I agree with Fritz. Like, instead of telling people, it's similar to saying don't say bad words instead of respect somebody else. The similar to like parliamentary procedure, you can't say I vote to not do something. You have to say I vote to do something else and be positive with it. So encourage people to be empathetic, encourage them to be compassionate, and encourage them to be maybe circumspect in their celebrations. But also just being completely transparent. In 2016, I was working in corporate America, and I called EAP after the 2016 election. And it helped me a lot in that moment. And so I think, again, regardless of the outcome, is something that people can remind their employees, please do remember. And don't do it, the day after, but maybe the week leading up to it. Please remind people that, we do have resources. If you're having a hard time, if you find yourself feeling out of sorts or feeling that you need someone to talk to, don't forget that we have these employee assistance programs that are available for you, and just leave it out there for people as a reminder, maybe in the week leading up to it.
Thanks for sharing that, Joy. And as we're coming up on our hour, one thought that's in my head: what if the leader or the manager of the organization is the one contributing to the division? Well, how would you advise a stakeholder or member of their team to respond or react in a way, or to try to communicate that in a way that they're not going to feel exposed or putting themselves in a vulnerable situation?
I have been in a situation where the person bringing me in to solve a problem was part of the problem. And so I usually first person get the first dibs at trying to convey to that person. But here's the thing, of what, and the psychologist in me will tell you this, is that a lot of our behavior is beyond our conscious awareness. Quite often we need some kind of intervention to help bring it to the fore. And if you tell somebody before they're ready, they may shut down and not get it and walk away. Really comes back to, if I'm able to get a person to put what's out there, read it back to them, have them look at it almost objectively and go, hey, that looks a little like the behavior I'm engaged in. And not say, you're right, because that may shut them down, but more like saying, so when you see that, what do you notice that you're feeling? If that's why I've been going back to, we've got to turn inside sometimes and check ourselves. And when I've been able to get the leaders, those people that were engaged in the problem, to begin to see how they're part of it, now we look for, is there a motivation to change it? And what would be the goal of that motivation? Because in many instances, as we as leaders, we want to be effective. We want our companies and organizations to do well. In many instances, we want people to actually feel better and have a more productive life. So if we can find a motivation personal to you that helps you stay on course and work on these things, then we can change things. But it really takes that kind of work.
I I agree with everything that Fritz is saying. I also want to add on to the situation where Fritz is not available and there is no external help to be a peer-to-peer mirror for that leader, and you've got someone who may be further down the leaderboard from that leader, someone that's their this is their boss's boss's boss, that is the one that's being divisive. And how do you give that person feedback? What are your channels? First, I would say speak to if it is your immediate manager, you can attempt that, vulnerable discussion. When, the feedback formation, when you say these things, it makes me believe this and it makes me feel this way, and I don't know if you recognize that. One of my favorite phrases, I don't know if you realize it lands this way with several people on the team, because it also gives them that olive branch, that out of, I don't know if you noticed, so they can say, I didn't notice, and maybe make that correction. But if they dismiss it all, then okay, next step, your HR business partner. I've given this feedback to my immediate manager, et cetera, and I'm not getting anywhere with it. What do you suggest I do? And then maybe there are other things, because documentation always matters. And if you make attempts to give the feedback, to ask for some assistance, ask for corrective behavior, and the behavior that is damaging your sense of psychological safety continues, you got to decide, do you want to continue to try to help that person in spite of themselves, or do you want to save yourself? That's where it gets at some point. And it also depends on how, I'm talking immediate manager. If the distance is even further, it gets harder and harder to manage that on your own. And you start to look for other people that might be closer to that person that can maybe give that feedback. But it depends on the level of psychological safety and the environment as a whole. Sometimes people just blithely say things and they have no idea that they've said something that doesn't sit well with people. And they might be open to the feedback. As Fritz says, they want to do better. And you might be able to read that room and figure out that they'd be open to that. But if everybody already knows that that person isn't open to it, you got to decide if that is the environment that you want to be in. And the reason I say this, and I'm speaking to, I've been accused of being a Robin Hood type person before, a Harriet Tubman type underground, encouraging people to leave. I'm encouraging you to be happy. If you find yourself in an organization where a lot of people are living through a leader that causes them anxiety, causes them stress, you can try and help the leader realize what they're doing, or you can speak in a different way by removing yourself from the organization. And eventually that leader will go to the doctor. Oh my God, our turnover is 30%. What's wrong? And they will figure it out that way.
Great.
That's right. And
Thank you,
that's when
Joy.
they'll be saying, I'm feeling it, and then feeling the pain.
Well, before we get to closing thoughts, I just want to also share with the audience some of upcoming things on our calendar. Joy and I have a PLI webinar coming up. We have some workshops. Our Canyon Ranch retreat has one spot left for October 16th. And we're also offering a complimentary session with a consultant to the people who attend this webinar. So please email tamara@loebleadership.com. Also, please feel free to connect with Joy, Fritz, and I on LinkedIn. Email us questions. Fritz, as we're coming up on the hour, closing thoughts, takeaways. What do you want people to have top of mind as they're leaving us today?
I want to have top of mind that it starts with you. And that might be something you knew already, but it's critical. It starts with you. If you're someone that is doing this work and you are starting to feel it, reach out and connect to colleagues and connect to people like ourselves, but try to do whatever you can to re-energize as much as you can. And then beyond that, build a coalition around you. Try to be as inclusive as possible as you're doing that work. And always be coming back to checking yourself, because if you are weary, if you lose the motivation and the energy and you're the leader, well, we need to re-energize you to keep it going. Thank
you so much for joining us today. I also want to thank our colleagues, Logan Moniz and Lindsay Milan, for their incredible work and getting us up and running on our new platform. And we look forward to seeing you at our next Real Talk. But please share your feedback, thoughts, comments. And we look forward to seeing you at our next panel discussion. Thank you so much.